Hello and welcome back to the Tech Blackboard. This is our part 6 and today I have got 15 very exciting questions in our AZ-104 real exam question and answer series. We have already covered 40 questions, and if you have missed watching any of these parts, then you will find the links for all of these parts in the description box. And as always, to help you learn in the offline mode as well, I will give a PDF version of part 6 PPT if you give me the correct answer of question number 46 and question number 54. You will find the answer of both these questions in this video itself. So let's begin our part 6. Let's begin our part 6 with some interesting questions on Azure Kubernetes. The question number 41 says that you deploy an Azure Kubernetes service cluster named AKS1. You need to deploy a YAML file to AKS1. The solution given here is that from Azure CLI, you run AZ-AKS. Does this meet the goal? To make you better prepared for the examination, here I present two more variations of the same question. The other two variations have exactly the same question, however, the solution is different. In question number 42, it says that from Azure CLI, you run AZ copy. And then question number 43 says that from Azure CLI, you run kubectl client. So out of these three options, which one do you think is the correct solution to deploy a YAML file to the Azure Kubernetes service? To find out the correct answer, here I am on the Microsoft documentation that talks more about how to deploy an Azure Kubernetes service cluster using Azure CLI. It's a kind of voting application deployed on Azure Kubernetes. All the steps are given here. The prerequisites are also listed. You can go step by step and find out more details on it. So first of all, you see that you have to create a resource group. And then you have a Azure Kubernetes cluster creation. And after that, how to connect to the cluster, that is also given here. If you scroll down a little more, then you will reach to a section which says run the application. So all the steps to run the application are also given here. So first step, if you will see, is create a file name azurevote.yaml. And if you remember the question correctly, this is what our question is also asking, that you have to deploy a YAML file in Azure Kubernetes cluster. So let's see what are the further steps. So you can see that you have the second step as copy the following YAML. So you can use this YAML file to practice on this application. And then in the third step, we will find our answer. It says that deploy the application using kubectl apply command and specify the name of the YAML manifest. And you can see here that we are using kubectl apply /f and then you give the name of the YAML file. So this is the correct way of deploying the YAML manifest file on Azure Kubernetes cluster. So as we saw on the Microsoft documentation, the correct answer for this business case is presented in question number 43, and that is from Azure CLI, you run the kubectl client. So that's a yes for question number 43. And then of course, the other two questions are no. I will give the link for that Microsoft documentation in the description box. It's a very interesting application and you must try before you get started on Azure Kubernetes service. Now let's talk about alerts and logging in Azure, and the same is presented in the question number 44 and question number 45. Let's read the question 44. The question says that you have an Azure virtual machine named VM1 that runs on Windows Server 2016. You need to create an alert in Azure when more than 2 error events are logged to the system event log on virtual machine within an hour. The solution given here is that you create an Azure storage account and configured shared access signatures. You install the Microsoft monitoring agent on VM1. And then you create an alert in Azure Monitor and specify the storage as the source. Does this meet the goal? Now question number 45 is also exactly the same. However, the solution presented is a little different. This one says that you create an Azure Log Analytic workspace and configure the data setting. You install the Microsoft monitoring agent on VM1. Then you create an alert in Azure Monitor and specify Log Analytic workspace as the source. So does this meet the goal? I have a third variation also for the same question that I will present later in this video. It's very important that you carefully examine all these variations, guys, because you never know what variation will come in your exam. So please pay careful attention whenever I'm presenting variations of the same question. Okay, so the crux of the question is that you need to create alerts for the events that are logged in the system events of a virtual machine at regular intervals. So do you think that Azure account, which is configured with shared access signature, is the solution for this? Or do you think log analytic workspace is a better solution? So this is the Microsoft documentation, which gives you an overview of Azure Monitor agents. You can read more about Azure Monitor agents on this page. However, the section I want you to pay attention is this one, which says Log Analytics Agent. And if you read through, it says that legacy log analytic agent collects monitoring data from the guest operating system and workloads of virtual machine in Azure, other cloud providers, and on-premises machines. So I hope that you can already relate the line workload of virtual machine in Azure, as this is the same what our question is also asking. So going by the Microsoft documentation, we can now easily say the correct answer or the correct way of logging the events from the event log of a virtual machine is log analytic workspace. And that's why the answer for the question number 44 is no. However, the answer for the question number 45 is yes. Now let's move to the question number 46. The question says that you have an Azure subscription that contains a user named user1. You need to ensure that user1 can deploy virtual machines and manage virtual networks. The solution must use the principle of least privilege. Which role-based access control RBAC role should you assign to user 1? And your options are owner, virtual machine contributor, contributor, and virtual machine administrator login. Now, two important things here that the user must be able to deploy virtual machines and he should also be able to manage virtual network. And the second important thing is that whatever role you assign to the user one must use the principle of least privilege. What that means is that the user should only be able to deploy virtual machine and manage virtual network. He should not get any access more than needed to do this job. So now let's understand the RBAC roles listed here on the Microsoft documentation, and then we will come back to find out the correct answer. So this is the Microsoft documentation that talks more about Azure built-in roles. All the RBAC roles in Azure are listed here, and you can see in this table we have all the accesses listed here. So we have contributor, we have owner, we have reader, and lot many more. So let's understand the owner RBAC role. So you can see the owner grants full access to manage all resources, including the ability to assign role in Azure RBAC. So this could be one of the potential answer. However, if you remember, we have to work on the principle of least privilege. So owner is not the correct answer for this question. Then the second RBAC role that was listed in the question was virtual machine contributor. You can read it out that it create, manage virtual machines, manage disk, install and run software, reset password of root user to the virtual machine using VM extension, and manage local user account using VM extension. However, the only problem with this RBAC role is that this role does not grant you management access to virtual network, and that was one of the asks in our question. So we can easily eliminate this RBAC role as well. Now let's look at the other RBAC role which was given, and that was virtual machine administrator login. So you can see that it enables you to view virtual machine in portal and login as administrator. But this is also not a valid option. So the only option that we are left with is contributor. So the contributor lets you grant full access to manage all resources, but it does not allow you to assign roles in Azure RBAC. However, this is also not the ask of the question, so we can ignore this part. And then it lets you manage assignments in Azure Blueprints or share image galleries. So contributor is the most suitable RBAC role that we need to fulfill this business case. And thus, as we read on the Microsoft documentation, the correct answer for this question is contributor. Because it fulfills all the requirement of the question, it lets you deploy virtual machine, it also lets you manage virtual network, and it also adhere to the principle of least privilege. I hope you understood the logic behind choosing the contributor. Before moving ahead, I just wanted to say that friends, it takes considerable amount of time and effort to find Microsoft documentation to justify each answer and give you an explanation for each question in our exam series. Please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your each like encourages me and ensures that the video is reaching to a greater audience. Do share the videos with everyone having interest in learning Azure Cloud technologies. Your comments and feedbacks give me a chance to understand what you want to see on this channel and help me improve my content. I always make sure to read each of your comment and reply to them. So keep supporting me and I promise to bring the content that helps you grow in your career. Moving on with question number 47, which says that which two of the following are elements of template schema? And your options are includes, parameters, scripts, and outputs. So this is the Microsoft documentation and it makes you understand the structure and syntax of ARM templates. Just a little scroll and then you can reach to the template format. And here in this section, you can see all the elements of a JSON file. And if you will see here, we have schema, we have API profile, then we have parameters, variables, functions, resources, and output. Here you can see that parameters and outputs are the two options that were also listed in our question. So the correct answer for this question based on Microsoft documentation is option B, parameters, and option D, outputs. Our question number 48 says that working on modernization, your company wants to move all services to Azure Kubernetes service. Which two of the following components contribute to the monthly Azure charge? And your options are master node, per deployed pod, networking resources, or per node VM. So what you need to tell is that out of these options, which of the two will actually contribute to the monthly Azure charge? Now it's important to understand with Kubernetes service, your organization only pay for the virtual machine instance, storage, and networking resource consumed by the cluster. And based on that understanding, we can easily answer this question. And the correct answer is networking resources and per node VM. Now let's move to the question number 49. It says that you have an Azure subscription named subscription 1 that contains an Azure virtual machine named VM1. Now VM1 is in a resource group named RG1. VM1 runs services that will be used to deploy resources to RG1. So you need to ensure that a service running on VM1 can manage resources in RG1 by using identity of VM1. What should you do first? Your options are from the Azure portal, modify the managed identity settings of VM1, or from the Azure portal, modify access control IAM settings for RG1. The third option is from the Azure portal, modify the access control settings of VM1. And the fourth option is from the Azure portal, modify the policies setting of RG1. And the correct answer for this question is option A. From the Azure portal, modify managed identity settings of VM1. To help you understand better, managed identities for Azure resources provides Azure services with an automatically managed identity in Azure Active Directory. And you can use this identity to authenticate any service that supports Azure Ready authentication without having any credentials in your code, or you can also enable or disable system assigned managed identity for VM using Azure portal. And that's the reason why we have chosen option A as a correct answer to this question. Now let's move to the question number 50, which is a yes no kind of a question. So for all the statements here, you have to choose yes or no. Now all these statements are related to the Azure import service. You can see all these four statements, all are related to Azure import service. So let me first take you to the Microsoft documentation from where I will gather the answer for all these statements. So this is the Microsoft documentation that talks more about Azure import export system requirements. It also gives you the supported operating system, and then if you will scroll down a little, then this is the section where I want your focus to be on. So this is the small table that gives the information about supported storage types. So what I will do is I will capture the table, this table here, and we'll take it to the presentation, and then we will answer our statements. So now we are back in our presentation, and I have captured that small table from the Microsoft documentation. And now let's read the first statement. The first statement says that Azure Blob Storage is supported with Azure Import Service. You can see here that we have Azure Blob Storage here, and it is supported in the import service. So the correct answer for the first statement is yes. Then we have second statement which says Azure Data Lake is supported with Azure Import Service. And you can see here that we do not have Azure Data Lake mentioned here. So the correct answer for the second statement is no. Moving on with the third statement, we have Azure File Storage is supported with Azure Import Service. And you can very well see here, we does have Azure File Storage and it is supported in Azure Import Service. So the correct answer for third statement is yes as well. Then moving towards the fourth statement, it says that Azure SQL Database is supported with Azure Import Service. However, we can see that Azure SQL Database is not listed here. Thus, the correct answer for this statement is no. Coming to question number 51, which again is a yes-no kind of question. And in the question number 50, the last question, we discussed about Azure Import Service. And in this question, we are going to discuss about Azure Export Service. Now, as we did in the question number 50, here I have pasted the documentation from Microsoft to better facilitate the answers. So let's read the first statement. It says that Azure Blob Storage is supported with Azure Export Service. And we can see here that yes, Azure Blob Storage is definitely supported in Export Service. Thus, the correct answer for this statement is yes. Then moving on, we have second statement which says Azure Data Lake is supported with Azure Export Service. And we can very well see here we don't have Azure Data Lake in Export Service. So the correct answer for this statement is no. Then we have third statement which says Azure File Storage is supported with Azure Export Service. And we can very well see in this table, we don't have Azure File Storage here in the supported service. However, if we check out this not supported part, we can very well read that Azure Files not supported. And thus the correct answer for the third statement is no. Moving on with the fourth one, it says that Azure SQL Database is supported with Azure Export Service. And definitely, as we do not see Azure SQL Database here with the export part, then the correct answer for the fourth statement is no again. Now let's read the question number 52. The question says that you have an Azure virtual machine named VM1 that runs Windows Server 2016. You need to create an alert in Azure when more than 2 error events are logged to the system event log on virtual machine 1 within an hour. And the solution given here is that you use Azure Advisor to collect the error events on virtual machine. Does this meet the goal? Now, just a while back in the question number 44 and question number 45, we discussed exactly the same question with other two variations of the solution. And in the question number 45, I told you that Azure Log Analytic Agent is the correct option in these kind of business cases because it helps you collect monitoring data from the guest operating system and workloads of virtual machines in Azure. In fact, you can use Azure Log Analytic Agent to collect monitoring data from other cloud providers as well. Not only that, you can use it to collect the monitoring data from on-premises as well. Thus, the correct answer for this question is no. Now let's read out our question number 53. The question says that you have an Azure subscription named Subscription 1. Now Subscription 1 contains resource group named RG1 and RG1 contains resources that were deployed by using templates. You need to view the date and time when resources were created in RG1. The solution given here is that from the subscription blade, you select the subscription and then click programmatic deployment. Does this meet the goal? Now friends, in earlier part 5, in question number 33, 34 and 35, I presented 3 more variations of the same question. And in question number 35, I explained that the correct way to view the date and time of the resources when they were created in a resource group is through the resource group blade. So you need to go to the resource group blade and then you have to click deployments. And then in the deployments, you can see the history of date and time of the resources when they were created in any resource group. And that's the correct way of doing it. So if you want more understanding with correct Microsoft documentation, then please check out question number 33, 34 and 35 of part 5 in our AZ-104 exam series. For now, I can tell you that subscription blade is not the correct way of seeing the date and time of the resources deployed in any resource group. Thus, the correct answer for this question is no. Now let's check out our question number 54. The question says that your Azure subscription contains an Azure storage account. You need to create an Azure container instance named container1 that will use a Docker image named image1. Now image1 contains a Microsoft SQL Server instance that requires persistent storage. You need to configure a storage service for container1. What should you use? Your options are Azure Files, Azure Blob Storage, Azure Queue Storage or Azure Table Storage. And the correct answer for this question is Azure Files. Now let me take you to the Microsoft documentation to validate this answer. Now here we are on the Microsoft documentation with the title Mount an Azure File Share in Azure Container Instances. And in the highlighted part here, you can read that Azure Files offer fully managed file shares hosted in Azure Storage that are accessible via industry standard server message block SMP protocol. Then further it says that using an Azure file share with Azure Container Instances provides file sharing features similar to an Azure file share with Azure Virtual Machines. And with that documentation from Microsoft, we can be sure that our answer, Azure Files, is the best answer for this business case. Now let's quickly jump to the question number 55, which is our last question for this part 6 of our AZ-104 real exam question and answer exam series. And the question says that your company want to move an entire solution to Azure. Due to the security constraints, the company wants to restrict creation of all resources in a particular region. Which Azure service can restrict resource creation to a specific region? And your options are Azure Monitor, Azure Availability Zone, Azure Policy, or Azure Web Apps. Now the actual requirement of this question is that you have to tell an Azure service that will restrict the creation of any resource in a particular region. So let's say you have a particular requirement, maybe due to the security reasons or government policies, because of which you have to create all Azure resources in a particular region. You cannot move out of that region. So what is one Azure service that can restrict creation of all resources across your solution in just one particular region? And the correct answer for this question is Azure Policy. Now let's go back to the Microsoft documentation and understand why Azure Policy fits this question. So here I am on the Microsoft page that talks more about Azure Policy. You can read more about Azure Policy. The overview is also given here. But if you will scroll down a little, then you will reach to a section which talks more about Azure Policy Object. And then you have a section called Policy Definition, and there is a subsection which talks about allowed locations. You can see it's deny, and it says that restricts the available location for new resources. Its effect is used to enforce your geo compliance requirement. And that's exactly the need of our question is. Based on Microsoft documentation, we can be sure that Azure Policy is the correct Azure service to restrict the resources in a particular region. I hope you like these 15 questions that we covered in part 6. If you have more questions, doubts, feedbacks, then do let me know in the comment section below.